Hello, and welcome to our webinar today. We are going to be talking about how to go from chaos to clarity. I am very pleased to be joined by two preeminent people in the project management space. I have Brett Harned here, who's a consultant and a coach from Same Team Partners. He's done conferences all over the world, so you're getting a great source of reference for material to help you on your journey to get to clarity with project management. And also Jim Patterson, who's the VP of Sales for OnePlan, who has 25 years of experience in the industry helping people manage their projects and get to clarity with strategic portfolio management. So thank you both for joining us. Welcome. I'd like to give a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. We're going to have some time for Q&A, so you can ask these gentlemen your burning questions and get them answered live during this call. If you have questions, just put them into the question box and we will get to them over time. Brett, would you like to say a little bit more about yourself and introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really looking forward to this presentation. Just a little bit about me. So everyone knows I spent my career in project management working on really large scale website and app projects with big brands like Ben and Jerry's and MTV, Harvard University, Zappos, and a lot more. I've held roles from producer to vice president of project management, and I started my own consultancy in 2015. So I work with teams to improve their project management practice through coaching, assessments, and workshops. And my company is called Same Team Partners. So on screen here, just some of the things that I'm writing. And there's a QR code there. You can see my site with a lot of samples of my work, including some of the work I've done with OnePlan. I wrote my book, Project Management for Humans, in 2017. And I'm currently writing a book live, weekly, publishing two pieces of the book on our Same Page blog. And it's all about how to thrive as a leader and how to build anti-fragile teams. So we post that twice a week. And the themes of the content really relate to what I'm going to talk about today. So you can find all this stuff at Same Team Partners or on my site. But I mentioned that OnePlan content. So I've been working with OnePlan, writing mostly articles since last year, and have published a number of articles on the blog. Um, there's a series on the topics we're going to cover today, and we're actually producing a guide that will wrap all of those pieces together and provide some tools and templates that I'm going to mention today. So be on the lookout for that. So those articles actually were based on the themes and the data that emerged from Gartner's December 2024 report called Program and Portfolio Management for Turbulent Times. Excuse me. We've taken some of their recommendations and expanded on them, and that's what I'm going to present today. So let's jump in. So first, a quote from that report, like, this is not my opinion. It's straight from Gartner. This quote really sets the tone for why we're here. It's a clear signal. What's coming isn't theoretical. In fact, disruption is already here, and the stakes are pretty high. Gartner's research found that most portfolio leaders aren't set up to handle rapid change. Few portfolio managers feel confident in their ability to adjust quickly, but most struggle to connect strategic planning with execution. And when that disconnect grows, organizations don't just slow down, they risk failure. But here's the good news. They also found in that report that organizations that embrace strategic portfolio management aren't just more resilient, they're more effective. They move faster, they align better, and they deliver more value under pressure. And that's what we're going to unpack today. Because like I said, we're already in it, right? So personally, I'm in tech. I've seen a lot, especially over the past year. I've seen teammates disappear, clients disappear overnight, good people out of jobs, teams restructured, and continuing the work with the expectation to keep delivering at the same pace. If that's your reality too, you are definitely not alone. These conditions, the instability, unclear direction, misalignment in teams, they aren't edge cases either. They're the norm. Even strong teams can lose traction fast. When priorities shift and communication lags, people end up working on the wrong things, or even worse, duplicating effort. And it's not just frustrating, it's wasteful, right? That's why we need a system that responds to disruption, not one that breaks under it. So Here's what Gartner's data shows us. Only a small fraction of portfolio teams, just 21%, are actually meeting or exceeding expectations when disruption hits. Most are stuck in reactive mode. Why? Because planning and execution are often disconnected. We make big strategic plans at the start of the year. I'm sure that's how a lot of us work. And then we treat them like they're gospel, right? But the reality is that things shift. Things can shift weekly. And if your priorities can't flex, if your plans can't adapt, your teams end up spending time and budget on things that no longer matter. And when that happens, the cost isn't just financial, it's also cultural. So momentum stalls, trust erodes, and opportunities get missed. I'm sure you know all of this stuff. Here's the good news. It doesn't have to be chaos all the time. Disruption doesn't have to derail you. It can actually refocus you. So if your portfolio strategy is built to flex, you can respond faster, make smarter decisions, and really cut the noise. Strategic portfolio management isn't about adding complexity. It's about giving you clarity. It helps you see what's working, what's worth fixing, and what it's time to walk away from. When that clarity becomes routine, uncertainty doesn't slow you down. It sharpens your focus. And that's where we're headed today. So these are the 5 areas we're going to talk through in this presentation. Each one addresses a common failure point in portfolio management, whether it's misalignment, rigidity, opacity, missed lessons, or leadership gaps. Together, they kind of form a repeatable framework that helps you to navigate uncertainty with more confidence and more clarity. So let's dig in. Let's start with a simple but powerful question. Are you working on the right things? Too often portfolios are full of projects that were greenlit based on outdated priorities. And in times of uncertainty, that's a major liability. So assessing portfolio health means taking a step back to evaluate strategic alignment, resource usage, and expected outcomes. This isn't about micromanaging, it's about protecting your investment and maximizing impact. So, signs of poor portfolio health. You probably know the signs, projects that no longer align with the strategy but keep getting funded because of sunk cost, teams stretched thin, or work that isn't delivering real value, constant delays and friction that no one can fix. And maybe the worst of all, no clear way to show what any of this is actually achieving. These aren't just project level problems, they're signals that your portfolio is out of sync. So if you're not regularly stepping back to assess what's working and what's not, you end up spending time, budget, and energy on work that doesn't move the needle. So if your portfolio is showing signs of strain, you don't want to wait for a crisis. You want to build in regular health checks to keep things on track. Think of these like a routine physical. They help you to catch issues early before they become chronic. A quarterly review forces you to pause, reassess, and ask, are we still doing the right work? Are we still aligned with strategy? Tools like a prioritization matrix can help you visualize what's delivering value and what's just draining your resources. And if a project is high risk and low return, well, that's a red flag worth acting on now rather than waiting later. So the portfolio prioritization matrix is a simple but powerful tool. And this is one of the tools that will be in our guide that we're going to put out. Plot your projects on a grid using 2 axes, right? Value and feasibility. High value, high feasibility, prioritize immediately. Low value, low feasibility, cut those projects, right? This visual approach helps remove politics and emotion from the conversation, so your decisions are based on data, not drama. So this is just one tactic that you can do. Thought that might be helpful for you all. But I want to step back before we move into the second section and ask something broader. Like, how do you know it's time to reevaluate your portfolio? Is it when resources feel stretched, when strategic goals change, or maybe when momentum just starts to fade? What signals do you notice in your portfolio, and how do you make space on them to act? Feel free to share your answers in chat or hang on to this question for later. We're going to have a Q&A, but we'll be interested to hear your thoughts on this. If nothing else, this is a question for you to reflect on after this presentation so that you can get better at it. All right. Number 2, let's talk about prioritization, because this is where even the best laid plans can fall apart. Most organizations spend months building detailed annual plans, and then the market shifts. A key initiative changes, a new opportunity appears. You know the plan, right? That plan becomes a constraint instead of a guide. So, in a fast moving environment, priorities cannot be fixed, they have to evolve. So, agile prioritization doesn't mean chaos, it means creating a system that helps you adjust with purpose. It's about staying focused on what matters most, even as the world changes around you. So, signs your prioritization needs a refresh. So, when your prioritization model doesn't flex, your people end up paying the price. You'll see teams grinding on work that no longer matters, while the projects you could drive real value sit there untouched. So, decisions get made based on influence rather than impact. And then suddenly you're not prioritizing, you're basically just firefighting or just working on the wrong things. So, this isn't just inefficient, it's demoralizing to the people who are doing the work. And if your team is constantly playing catch up, it's a sign the system, not the people, need to be reset. So, what's the answer? Well, it's not to stop planning, it's to plan in a way that adapts. Rolling prioritization gives you space to revisit decisions as new information comes in. And a living backlog helps you to respond to change without scrambling. And regular alignment checkpoints ensure that what you're prioritizing still reflects what the business actually needs. So, this approach keeps you focused, responsive, and in control, even when those conditions shift because you know that they will. So, we're going to talk about using a weighted scoring model. This kind of model takes the guesswork and really the politics out of prioritization. Instead of relying on gut instinct or the loudest voice in the room, you use real business criteria to decide what deserves your team's time and budget. And here's how it works. First you define the factors that matter most to your organization. Here I'm defining strategic alignment, projected ROI, risk level, resource availability, and time to value. So you take those, then you assign a weight to each factor based on how important it is to your organization or your portfolio. Score each project on a scale, say 1 to 10 for each category, then multiply the score by the weight, then add them up, and you've got an objective ranked list of your best opportunities. So high scores mean high impact. That's why I've highlighted the one in blue. And more importantly, this model gives you a transparent, repeatable way to make smart decisions, especially when conditions are shifting. I love tools like this that allow me to rely on data rather than emotion because it helps to make a decision much quicker. All right, so let's end this section with a practical question for your reflection again. So, how does your organization make tough prioritization decisions today? I don't know why that word's hard for me to pronounce. Is it consistent? Is your process consistent? Is your process transparent? And more importantly, does it help you feel confident that you're focused on the right things? So, again, for reflection, how can you strengthen that process and be confident? Feel free to share your thoughts in the chat. I'm going to move on to the next section, which is tracking and communicating value. So, let's talk about something that trips up a lot of teams. It's tracking and communicating value. I think we're really great at reporting activity like tasks completed, hours logged, milestones hit, but that's not what leaders are always looking for. They don't always want to play by play. Most leaders I know don't want the play by play. They want to know what changed, what improved, and how does this move us closer to our goals, right? The real challenge isn't just delivering value though, it's proving it. And that means shifting your focus from activity to outcomes and making those outcomes easy for stakeholders to see, understand, react to, and act on. So, signs if your value tracking isn't working, and maybe you're not tracking value at all. But if your updates sound like, hey, we completed 80% of tasks, but no one can say what changed because of that work, you've got a value visibility problem. So when KPIs are unclear or tracked inconsistently, stakeholders are going to lose confidence. And when they don't see the impact, they start filling in the blanks, asking for constant updates, micromanaging you, second guessing your roadmap and your decisions, or pulling the plug on good work because they can't see what that work is doing or what it will do. So it's not just about tracking value, it's about communicating it clearly, consistently, and in terms leadership actually cares about. So if you want leaders to stay invested, You need to show results, not just effort. That starts with defining outcome-based KPIs, things like cost savings, revenue growth, faster delivery, or improved customer experience. You can name those KPIs. Then make that value visible, right? Ditch the static status reports and use live dashboards that connect your work to the business impact. Don't save the analysis for the end. Track that value continuously. Because when you make impact part of the regular conversation, you build trust, you surface issues early, you stay aligned on what actually matters, and you can pivot when needed. And that is so important in today's business. So, this is where a dashboard tool like OnePlan becomes really essential. It gives you a real-time view of metrics that matter, not how many tasks are done, but of course that's there, but what kind of impact those things are making. So your dashboard should really tell a strategic story, right? Here's what we're working on, here's how it ties to our goals, and here's the measurable change we're seeing. When you show outcomes over activity and connect those outcomes to business priorities, you shift the conversation from status updates to impact. Now, I want to show a couple of screenshots of the helpful data you can glean in your OnePlan dashboard. Jim is going to show us more of this in a few minutes, but this dashboard view shows everything from projects to budgets, total ROI, and more. It's very powerful. Then this one's got the key results runway showing a KBI and how it's mapped out. And then you can get more detailed, right? Like this view is showing a portfolio of projects in their current status. As you can tell, there is a lot you can do with OnePlan to help you and your stakeholders to have a clear view of your work, its progress, as well as its value. Again, Jim is going to show us more shortly. But again, another question to wrap up this section. Um, what outcomes do you track today? Are those outcomes visible to your stakeholders in a way that builds trust and drives decisions? I'll say this is an area for me as someone who's in program management. As a project manager coming into program management, really into status reports and just tracking tasks done, not really tracking value, not talking about value. And it's so important in today's world where we're trying to stay relevant, keep our work relevant, keep it valuable to the business. So think on that. All right. Next section is learning from failure. Every portfolio has failures. I know I've had a few of my own. The question is like, what do you do with those failures? In my opinion, the best teams don't chase perfection. They build systems that turn setbacks into insights. Learning from failure isn't just about asking what went wrong, right? It's about digging into the why and putting guardrails in place to make sure it doesn't happen again. And without that structure, mistakes get repeated, trust erodes, and progress stalls. But when you treat failure as fuel, you create a culture that improves every time things go off track. So, what are the signs of poor failure management? You can spot poor failure management pretty quickly. We all know about postmortems. If your postmortems feel like blame sessions or they just get skipped entirely, which is honestly what I see more often than not, when those things happen, people stay quiet. When teams hide what went wrong or keep lessons siloed, you lose the chance to improve. And you lose the chance to improve at scale because one lesson in one project can inform a change in an entire organization that could save you time and money, lots of it. Here's the thing though, mistakes happen, but repeating them, that's a signal that the organization still is not learning because it's not safe to speak up or there's no system in place to apply what's been learned. That's failure being buried instead of used. We can use our failures in so many ways to make our organization stronger, and I hope that you recognize that. So, tactics for learning from failure. I'm sure that everyone in this presentation knows what postmortems are for, but again, we don't all do them or we don't do them well. And when we skip them, when we rush through them, or we use them to assign blame, we're missing out. Not just on fixing issues, but on building stronger, more cohesive teams that solve problems and evolve together. And those are the types of teams we need when times are tough. So, postmortems are just the starting point. to truly learn from failure, you need structure, you need follow through, and you need visibility. So start by making them factual and blame free. Use templates to identify patterns and to dig into root causes, not just the surface issues. Remember, there are root causes to these things, and they might be within the way you're communicating, your collaboration practices, or even your culture, right? So when you have these meetings, you then have to share the insights, not just within your project team, but across the entire portfolio. And more importantly, make it actionable, right? When you come out of a postmortem, assign ownership, set deadlines, follow up. Because if the learning doesn't lead to change, it was just talk. And your team, they're going to notice that too. So talk about tools for this. Like I mentioned templates, like you don't need a fancy template here, but you do need a consistent way to capture and share what you have learned, right? So I say start simple. After every project or every major milestone, I think that's even better. Create a document that outlines what worked, what didn't, and most importantly, why. Dig into those root causes, identify specific improvements, and name who's responsible for making those things happen, right? This isn't busy work. It's how you build a feedback loop into your process, one that helps teams grow, prevents repeated mistakes, and turns experience into evolution. All right, so let's get real. What happens after your team completes a project postmortem? Does it stay in a doc and no one reads it? Or is it turned into better processes across your organization? Better yet, how do you ensure lessons become behavioral changes in your organization? I would love to hear your thoughts on this. A lot of the teams that I consult with are not doing postmortems or retrospectives. If they are, they're rushing through them and not giving them the time they need. And they're certainly not following up on them and socializing that work across the organization. And this is a huge missed opportunity. So I definitely urge you to, if you're not doing this stuff, to kind of reformulate the way that you're doing postmortems or retrospectives. All right, I am going to move on to our fifth and final section. I want to talk about leadership because really in uncertain times, it's the one thing that teams need the most. So when everything feels up in the air, teams aren't looking for perfect answers. They're looking for clarity, right? Your team wants someone to cut through the noise and say, here's what matters right now. They need to understand the direction, the priorities, and how their work contributes to something that still makes sense. Because strong leadership doesn't require having it all figured out. It requires showing up with focus, transparency, and the ability to align people around purpose, even when the path forward is still taking shape. So, signs of leadership gaps. I mean, hey guys, we could talk about leadership practices or best practices for days. But again, we're talking about when times are unclear, right? Here's the thing, when leadership goes quiet, teams don't just wait. They fill in the blanks. And more often not, they assume the worst. I've been in that situation. You may have too. I think without clear direction, people default to their own priorities. And that's when silos form, communication breaks down, and momentum stalls. Decision making slows because no one's sure what matters anymore. And when progress isn't recognized, motivation drops. So these aren't just soft signals, right? These are leading indicators that leadership clarity is missing and that your team is drifting. So some tactics for strategic leadership. And I keep talking to project managers and portfolio managers about being strategic. This is the move. This is where you need to head in your career to be an effective project or portfolio manager. Because leadership and uncertainty, it isn't about pretending you have all the answers, right? It's about showing up with consistency, empathy, and direction that drives you toward a goal or a strategy. So, one of the things that I always say to do is start with regular check ins. Again, really simple advice. But these aren't just status updates, right? There are moments for you to listen. There's moments for you to spot risks early. There are also times for you to go in and reset focus when it's needed. Because when priorities shift, and we all know that they will, You have to revisit goals openly and bring your team along with the ride. So don't assume that everyone's aligned just because no one's asking questions. You actually have to be the one to be asking questions. I also think recognition matters more than ever in uncertain times. Progress might feel slow, but celebrating small wins gives people energy to keep going. I think a lot of times, especially in downtimes, things can get low, people cannot be feeling great, and we forget to celebrate the little things. But even the smallest thing, like making a step toward a deliverable, or getting a decision made, or pleasing a stakeholder, or having a good meeting, those are all reasons to celebrate. Again, making your team feel good, like they're a part of the journey, is a big part of this. It's a part of great leadership. I believe that the best leaders consider and serve their teams. Finally, here on this slide, be transparent, even when the path forward is unclear. Again, teams don't expect perfection, but they do expect honesty. And remember that clarity builds trust. And in times of ambiguity, trust is your most valuable leadership currency. All right, so let's talk about how to make those check ins a little bit more meaningful, because a great check in doesn't need to be long. It just needs to be very intentional. So ask your team what they're focused on. Ask what's in their way, things that you're probably already doing, right? But celebrate those wins, like I said, even if they're small. But most importantly, ask how you can help. I think these four questions can really help you to build alignment, surface risks early, and show your team that you're present and that you're invested in the work that they're doing. I think done right, it's 30 minutes a week that builds trust, fuels momentum, and keeps everyone rowing in the same direction, even when the water gets choppy. So, closing kind of thought here. As a leader, what are you doing to keep your team aligned, focused, and energized? What systems or rituals help you maintain momentum even when the path forward feels messy? Think on that. Maybe we'll discuss during the Q&A. But on that note, I'm going to wrap up here. Just a couple more thoughts, and then we're going to jump into a demo. So, uncertainty is not going away, right? But how you respond to it, that's entirely up to you. I think we've covered 5 ways to really bring some structure to the chaos. Assess your portfolio's health, prioritize what matters most, make your value visible, learn from your failure to get better, and then lead with clarity. If you do those things consistently, you're not just navigating uncertainty, you're using it as a strategic advantage. That's what high performing organizations do. They don't wait for stability, they get better in the middle of the storm, and so can you. So, again, you can't control the uncertainty, but you can define how your organization moves through it. The tools we covered today aren't just about managing work, they're about leading through complexity with clarity, courage, and intention, because that's what portfolio leaders do. You connect vision to action. You translate chaos into focus. You create stability where others see volatility. And when things shift, as they always do, you won't be caught off guard. You'll be ready to guide, to prioritize, and to lead with confidence. And that's not just portfolio management, that's leadership that lasts. All right, so thank you so much. My contact info is here. This QR code leads you to my website, brettharned.com. There's a page that's filled with a bunch of my project management content. Thanks again. Jim, I am ready for a demo and maybe a little Q&A.
All right, let me share my screen and let me know when you can see.
There, it's up. We can see it.
All right, terrific. I'm going to leave my camera off just to save some bandwidth for the demonstration. But, Brett, great ideas, great thoughts, great recommendations, great best practices that you outlined there. And one plan is really designed as a platform to enable all that and allow you to automate a good chunk of that. It's a solution that's provided for full strategic portfolio management. It's delivered in the Microsoft cloud very securely. We have pre-built solutions for SPM, as well as the ability to tailor and build your own. We also have integrations with other solutions, workflows and automation to help automate these processes that were outlined here today. The dashboards and reporting that were alluded to, and as well as an AI assistant to help you get through all of that and augment your your human intuition and your human decision making with some additional aspects. It's also a single platform that portfolio leaders across the organization can use. I mean, there is a move towards ePMOs today outside of functional and departmental type of PMOs. But I think to do a lot of the things that Brett outlined here today, you need some measure of portfolio management and governance in place. Now, some organizations, depending on their size and their preference, maybe have uniform governance across the organization and adhere to those things regardless of the portfolio that's being worked on. However, what we're finding in this age of digital transformation and business transformation, that specific areas of the business have their own unique needs. So there's some measure of flexibility that's needed within that framework of portfolio management and governance that's required to successfully meet the needs of an organization. So having specific areas or domains that people can actually have their own portfolios but feed into the overall organizational needs and align with the objectives of that organization is very important. In many cases today, we see hybrids where you have to not only collaborate on these things and have visibility, like Brett alluded to, cross-functionally, but also up and down the management chain so that leadership gets what they want, but you can execute and succeed and deliver the outcomes that you're looking for. Now, one plan is designed as a solution that embodies this. I'll show you this in the demonstration, but the strategic elements, putting your strategic plans in place so that not only you can execute on them, but you can align your projects to them. There's even light enterprise architecture in here so that you can align those things with other elements that you need to be associated with. Sometimes products have to be modified, applications have to be modernized, business capabilities have to be updated in order to do those things. And the whole intake of ideation and requests, when we talk about reevaluating your portfolio, there's these new ideas, requests, and things that come in that have to be factored in and evaluated against your active portfolio. And trade-offs need to be made as far as what should we approve, what should we maybe suspend and not do. As part of that process. And the full portfolio management process has to take all that in, whether it be portfolio visibility and selecting the right things to work on, factoring your resource capacity versus the demand for the things that you have. Can we actually deliver and actually have the wherewithal to do it? The financial limitations that you have to deal with on the financial planning. And then evaluating change with what if scenario modeling is very important. On the execution side of things, that has to happen. The focus here is really about the portfolio management today, but ultimately, whether it be waterfall type of approaches, more agile approaches, or maybe even encapsulating other popular work management or task management tools that are out there, be able to bring all that together into a common repository so that we can have the right information to make the decisions is very important. And getting the team members involved, getting the right feedback on the outcomes and what we're doing and what we're delivering and how it's contributing to our overall goals is very important, whether we're just reporting status or feeding in time to the resource management aspect of that. But it really is all about outcomes. The reporting we get around that, the multi-dimensions of that, how things interrelate, it's really about delivering outcomes and value. Now, AI doesn't hurt. We'll show you a little bit about Sophia today and the fact that she can augment what we're doing in all of these different disciplines wherever we are in the tool set. But the key is, like Brett was saying, we have to do the right work for the organization, but we have to be enabled to execute well. We have to do the work right. Now, visibility, getting that reporting at all levels of the organization, whether it be at the portfolio level, whether it be at the program level, whether it be at the project level, or even more detailed than that. Being able to get that at any level of detail is very important, and one plan helps you do that. And all the different dimensions of that, whether it be strategic information, whether it be more ideation and requests and how we look at that funnel and analyze what we should be working on maybe and what we should take on, and even just overall portfolio and project analysis, all those aspects have to be incorporated into the mix. Now, we'll talk more about AI in the demonstration here as we go through, but let me pull an instance of one plan into here. And I'm going to start in the strategic area because we don't have a strategy or objectives of the organization outlined, what are we really aligning to? And one plan gives you the full facility to outline and structure the way you would like to. The objectives, meaning the strategies and the things that we want to achieve, and the tangible key results or measures that we have that help us understand what we need to do and then how we are progressing towards achieving those objectives. Now, all the things that we do in an organization should, for the most part, align with these things as we go through. And when we do that, we can make sure that we're working on the right things and that we are having a high likelihood of tracking to fulfilling on what it is we want to do, whether it be an objective we have here, like improve IT infrastructure, maybe a tangible key result, like reduce server downtime by 50%. You can drill in and you can define these things any way you like, and the measures that you'd like to have around these things as you work on them. And the key here is be able to define them well, but then how are they associated with the other things in your project and portfolio management realm? Notice that this key result is associated with a number of incoming ideas and projects, as well as some enterprise architecture elements like products and applications that need to be factored in. Now, one of the nice things about this, and Brett showed you a slide on this, was the fact that you can visualize these things, not just look at it tabular. What other predecessors and successors do we have to this key result? What is the actual interrelationships that we have? These objectives and key results, what projects and epics are going to contribute to their success? What products, applications, business capabilities do we need to factor in? And if they are off track, say a yellow here, can we look at the details around that at any given point in time and see why this thing might be at risk? Maybe look at the details on how these things are tracking. Once again, these things are all interrelated, and it's important that they are very much interrelated. Now, if you go into the ideation area that we talked about, and we look at the myriad of requests and ideas that might come in from all different parts of the organization or from our customer base, the idea is we can look on these things. And as Brett was talking about, we need to have some common way to value and measure these things. He talked about things like feasibility and priority and other things like that. Well, having weighted prioritization scores and weighted scoring, as you see over here in this prioritization score column, is one way to do it. There might be some crowdsourcing and voting on the sentiment of how popular this idea might be. We might look at how these things are associated with different key results and other things like that. And the other thing here is that you can characterize these things the way that you see fit. So for example, as I go into the details around this, you can capture any of the data that you'd like to. I mean, these are templates that I'm showing you here today that we work with, but the idea to be able to look at the metadata and how we characterize these things, the approval cycles that we need to go through, and even using things like AI to be able to do things like generate a value statement for a particular thing. So for example, create a value statement for this idea. Instead of starting from a blank canvas, we don't have to take this verbatim if we don't like, but we can actually have the AI, based on what you've already entered about this idea, basically generate a value statement to help in the justification and get this thing approved. And here it is in rich text format that we can choose to approve and accept. And the data that's already in there was actually created using this particular basis. And once again, the whole idea of how it aligns, what other things it might be associated with, and then ultimately through workflow approval, be able to reorganize these things and promote them into the projects that you're going to work on after they've been vetted as far as their value, the outcome that we're looking for, and how well it aligns with the objectives of the organization. Now, when we get to the selection of these things, this is another area where Sophia can come in handy. I might have all of these myriad of ideas in an active portfolio, and I can put prompts in here regarding something like this and basically say, give me some insights into this. So for example, based on associated key results, votes, priority, and ROI, what 3 projects should we approve first and why? And it would look at the data that we have in one plan. It's looking at its large language model and as its basis. It's looking at what we've trained it on strategic portfolio management. And it's actually leveraging the data in your one plan solution to give you an idea and assessment of which are the top things that we should actually look at approving and why, and the rationale behind it. So once again, we end up making the ultimate decision, but AI can assist us in a very tangible way with what we're working with here. Now, ultimately, we're going to end up with a portfolio of projects that we're working on. And the key is to be able to look at these in very flexible ways. And we talked about things like we're looking at as far as outcomes and different measures. For example, if I go look at just an overall portfolio summary, we can establish one or more portfolios in our organization. And one plan can be designed to be an enterprise portfolio management solution. Notice we have multiple portfolios in here. And you can create your own portfolio hierarchies. In this case, we got portfolios and then programs within that, and then projects and epics within those. Even features within the epics if you want to do things in a more agile fashion. And the key here is as we expand these things, we can look at all the different projects and programs that we have. We can also look at all the different tools that we might be connected with. Some people might be using things like a Microsoft project. They might be using Jira, Azure DevOps to feed in the execution data that rolls up to these portfolios. One of the advantages of one plan is that we allow you to use the execution tool of your choice. Even though one plan has the facilities in and of itself to do those things, you may already be invested time, effort, and thought-wise into those things that you might want to leverage them. So once again, here's a very KPI-oriented list view of our portfolio. And you can define what those are. And these can be calculated KPIs on metrics like schedule health, overall status, effort health, issue health, etc. But we can also go in here and look at this in a variety of other ways. If you want to go in here and just look at it from a prioritization perspective, as we're going to reprioritize our portfolio, you may be on a regular cadence, or there may be triggers and market changes that drive the need to do portfolio analysis over and over again at periodic times, not just an annual operating plan like was done in the past. But the cool thing in here is I could look at my portfolios not just by the primary hierarchy I created, but I could then look at it by different focuses. So for example, if I categorize my projects in different ways, I can look at this and say, what are all the process improvement projects I'm working on? What are all the strategic projects I'm working on? Oh, geez, what compliance projects are they camping on us about we need to work on? And look at those as individual portfolios, and we can group, summarize, and filter by all these parameters as you see fit. We also have board views for the more agile folks. And in here, you can establish what the columns and what the lanes are, and even establish limits on things like dollars and resource capacity as you do these. This thing, I'm looking at the state of the project as the columns. I don't really have any swim lanes in here, but let's just say I wanted to add one. Let me add a swim lane in here by, business unit. Now I've got all the transformation business unit elements in here. I've got the professional services elements in here, etc. And even though cards only hold a limited amount of data, I can always access the details and drill into the entire project from here, or I can just go in and grab a quick edit pop-out to get all the high-level details about this project at any given point in time and see why this thing might be yellow and why this is showing up. And it looks like it's because of the schedule health. Everything else seems to be on track at this point in time. And then for those that are more product-oriented, we do also have roadmap views. And those roadmap views allow us to view these with dynamic data, not just manual views that we create on our own, but using the real data that's in here and create these dynamically. For example, I've got the swim lanes here done by business unit, the colors by the status. Well, what if I wanted to look at this by, the same kind of categories we talked about earlier on, and maybe the status I want to see in here is really more about the financial health, and understand how we're doing on the financial health and see how those all change. Once again, views of this portfolio that help us analyze and redirect. And since this is live data, we can always get to those same quick edit data that we did before from any of the other views. Okay. Now, if I drill into a specific project all the way and I say, let me just go down to say this data warehouse migration project. And the details page allows me to capture and structure this form and the sections of these forms any way I like, with phases, gates, stages. Maybe the business case data gets carried over from the idea. And then other information we have in here like product prioritization. What are these aligned with? Weighted prioritization calculation scores, etc. And here's this one is aligned, and this particular project is supporting a number of key results in the strategic plan, as well as associated with and possibly dependent on certain applications and products as well. There's financial tracking and planning in here. So you can actually have detailed financials, both labor and non-labor alike. You can do your resource planning that rolls up to an overall resource plan. And we also have work plans in here that allow you to do both agile, more sprint-based planning, and more backlog planning, as well as overall schedules in a more waterfall fashion. And just like when we have in the portfolio, we have board views in this as well as list views that allow us to look at this in a variety of different ways. And once again, the reporting we'll talk about in a little bit, but for example, in a more project-centric view, I can look at here and basically look at the visualizer from a project-specific way, and I can see the dependencies we have here. But then the same kind of runway I looked at the strategic level, I can see that this particular project is supporting or contributing to a number of different key results which support these objectives. And there's other products and applications that we have supporting here as well. Okay. On the resource side of things, we're always dealing with real world resource constraints. Now, as I just flashed at you the overall resource plan for an individual project, we can look at resources across the enterprise. So for example, I'm looking at resource plans by role, and I can see that I still have some plans where I have generic developer resource associated with that. I've got to put some names to this at some point in time. So for example, I might want to look in here and see if there's any candidates so that I can actually work with if I'm a resource manager. And I can say what resources that based on best match might be a good fit. Now, like Steve McGarrett in this time frame has some availability. Perhaps Oscar Martinez has time in that availability. And I can select those resources and replace and balance these resources, or even use the same method to replace over-allocated named individuals as I go through my overall resource planning and deal with those constraints. Now, the last thing I'll start with before I finish with is the whole idea of what-if analysis. There's a dynamic modeler in here that allows you to have a pool of projects and ideas that you can assess at any given point in time what it is that you can or cannot do based on certain constraints. So for example, if I look at all the things I would like to do that's in here from ideas and projects, I basically can see that if I did all these plans, I would exceed my financial capabilities to deliver on these particular projects. I can also see that to do all these, I don't have the resources and I have conflicts and overcapacity, over allocation that would be required in order to make that happen. I just can't do it from that basis. And I can establish, I'm just going to do this at a very high level. Let's just say my limit was a $10 million budget. I can actually do a combination of selection and deselection, see that what can be in and out of this that can actually fit within that, these constraints. And I can actually take the timelines and I can actually use time phasing to help fit things within certain budget constraints by moving things in and out on the Gantt chart. Now, ultimately, on this $10 million budget, if I looked in here and I looked at it from a dollar perspective, what this model that I saved will tell me that I'm actually within that $10 million range here. And also, if I look at it from a resource capacity perspective, it looks like if I use this mix of projects that I selected, I have very little over allocation in here, and this might be a doable model for me. Ultimately, you may want to compare a whole bunch of different scenarios and look at metrics like total budget, total effort, what the benefits are. Well, if I was going to evaluate maybe doing a $15 million budget, what kind of benefits could I get from it? The benefits comparison here says that I might get an additional $12 million in benefit if I invested another $5 million. Well, that outcome may be worth me trying to find the funding. And I can do those types of comparisons. I can look at a different analysis on the visualizer. I can look and see what things I selected and didn't select and consider the dependencies that I might have to factor in as I reevaluate these selections. I can do things like look at bubble charts to see where these things fit on a prioritization versus benefits matrix, very much like that. But for example, if we had a feasibility score in here, like Brett talked about, we can look at a matrix on that basis as well. And even show the things we didn't select and see if there's things that fit in the sweet spots of this matrix that we might want to select. Once again, dovetailing with some of the things that Brett was talking about on a selection basis. Ultimately, dashboards across the board are something that we have throughout this. And one plan has a robust data set of not only the data that it has from its native application, but also the things we might bring in via our productized connectors across the entire application. And as we look at this, we have all kinds of reports that we can drill into, whether they be portfolio summaries, whether they be health summaries, et cetera, that we can work into. And we can drill into those reports. So ultimately, I wanted to keep this very high level today, and I think we should maybe move towards the Q&A session at this point.
Sounds good to me.
Perfect. Well, we had some really good questions come in while you were demonstrating, Jim. So I'll start with a couple here that I think will be really interesting for us to discuss. This one might be a start for Brett. How do we ensure that our project's business case aligns with the company's strategy when we don't have visibility into the strategy mission or long-term and short-term goals?
Yeah, tough one, right? I saw this while Jim was presenting. I don't know. I think what it comes down to is if we don't have visibility into the company's strategy, then we're flying blind. And building a business case without that context is really like pitching a tent with no ground beneath it, right? So I think the first thing is you need to name the gap. You have to ask the uncomfortable but necessary question that's what does success look like for the company right now? Um, and even if the answer is vague, I think that gives a starting point. And then you can kind of start to reverse engineer in a way, like look at where investments are already going, which teams are growing, what leadership's talking about the most, what feels important, and then using those signals to kind of align. And I know that that's not like a perfect scenario, like that's not how you really want to do things, but it's pragmatic, I think, in that instance. And I think you have to build alignment into the business case itself, right? Stating assumptions, calling out areas where strategic clarity is needed. That's going to make it easier for decision makers to confirm or kind of course correct when needed. Because I think that what it comes down to, if your strategy feels like it's a black box, um, you basically wait for clarity or you work in a way that invites it. You basically like I prefer the second option, but it's like you do what you can in the moment. So I don't know if that's the best response to the question, but those are my thoughts. Anything to
Jim, what
add
do
there?
you have additional thoughts? Yeah, I think that we have some best practices from our customers that help with that, right? To tie those OKRs really into the planning process. But Jim, what have you seen from best practices in the field?
It's really about communication. Sometimes the reason it doesn't happen well is that you use the word clarity in your presentation, right?
Yeah.
And the
Hmm.
thing is that the strategic plan may be put in place, but who knows about it? Who actually has visibility to it?
Right.
Who is actually factoring it in when they making their decisions on what to pursue or what not to pursue, right? And that means not only just up and down the chain, but cross-functionally, because the impact of those strategies are different depending on where you sit horizontally in the organization as well. So
Right.
once again, having a mechanism that you can clearly communicate that and people can see it tangibly, and in your communications, as you talked about in your presentation, making sure that that's part of what's communicated clearly across. And just because you put a strategy in place doesn't mean that's not being triggered and changed periodically. And when those
Right.
changes happen and priorities change, if people aren't aware of those things, we're going to make missteps in our selections, right?
Right.
And we're going to end up being misaligned because the tug in organizations today is really about sometimes we get pulled away from the strategic because the operational demands overwhelm us, right?
True.
And we,
True.
and we always get pulled into the firefighting, and next thing you know, we put the strategic on the back burner, right?
Right.
So those are some of the things that I'm seeing.
Here's another question. Typically, agile and waterfall methodologies do not mix well, especially when it comes to reporting to senior management. What strategies do you use to obtain current data when you're working within an agile cycle, especially when the team may be too busy to communicate effectively?
Yeah, I think Jim's probably going to have a better response for this, but it's true. Like they don't mix well, especially when senior leadership wants like a neat timeline and your team's still figuring things out. Like that's the rub, right? I think instead of forcing agile to behave like waterfall, I focus on building a bridge between the two. And that means setting really clear expectations for what progress looks like. I think it's probably using some form of a dashboard, which I'm sure Jim can talk about, or weekly pulse meetings to show traction, not just task lists, kind of like what I was talking about in the presentation, showing value and movement. So yeah, I don't know, Jim. I don't know if you have thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple disconnects. The one is what works for the team at the execution level isn't necessarily what leadership is looking for at the portfolio level, right? And
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
make decisions. And what we've tried to do in one plan is we actually have work types, just like we talked about portfolio types, right? And plan types, where we have backlogs for more agile things. We have more waterfall plans and tasks and schedules that if there's components, because there's many where there's a waterfall aspect to the project, but the development cycles maybe are more agile. So they are hybrid in their nature, right? The key is, can you let the teams work the way they want to work, yet provide the metrics at the portfolio level that leadership wants to see in the aggregate? And that's where I showed in the slide about that whole enterprise portfolio management and governance, right? Establish those things that leadership wants to see. They still want to see the language of the business. They're not really cared so much about burn ups and burn downs and velocity charts. They still want to see variances. They still want to see financials, right? They still want to see return on investment. They still want to see IRR. And we can provide those things if we provide all those aspects in the system. The execution layer may have its own metrics, but the portfolio level needs to have its own.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great answer. Brett, I think this one dives into a little bit more about one of the reflection questions that you asked earlier. You talked about how often lessons learned just goes into a Word document and never, socialized throughout the organization. Do you have some tips for people that are looking to kind of take their lessons learned or their postmortems to the next level? Like, what are some best practices you've seen in being able to socialize that?
Yeah, I think to echo Jim, it comes down to communication. And in this time, it's about practicing strategically, I think, practicing communication within organizations. So setting up some kind of process by which you're sharing or reporting back findings or changes or even trends that your team's finding. So for me, it's been helpful to create at a kind of discipline lead or departmental lead level, kind of like a team of folks who get together to discuss these things, hear the findings, reports, making sure that things are actually being followed up on. And then having a way of communicating that out to the teams kind of that they're managing to make sure that people are aware of the changes that are being made. It depends on the scale of the team, how large the team is, but what comes down to is making sure that you're talking about it, that you're not just having a meeting and moving on from it, that you're assigning action and you're talking about it and making it visible in the organization.
I think the key, like you alluded to in your presentation, it's doing something about it and actually turning it into something that we can learn from and get better at.
Right.
We try to have facilities in one plan, for example, where if we redirect and we capture key decisions, right, such that there's a trail when somebody second guesses you, why did the project end up this way? Well, yes, we originally said we were going to do this, but here were key decisions we all agreed on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the lesson learned is that we redirected because we found out things that we didn't know at the start, right?
Mm-hmm.
Also, we capture a log of lessons learned within the solution such that not only is it there for the project, but it's there for others that follow us, right? As a repository of information,
Right.
a knowledge base, such that they can see if we do a similar project, what did they run into last time? So we have those things, but none of that stuff replaces the communication aspect and us actually sharing of information.
Right. I mean, there's the documentation of it all as well, right? If you're making process changes, making sure you're assigning responsibility for someone to update that process documentation, communicating out to the rest of the organization that, hey, we have a new standard. It's a lot. It can be a lot to keep up with, but it's worthwhile. And if you stay dedicated to being a good communicator about it, I think you'll see more success and more adoption to the change.
Agreed.
Well, perfect. We're coming up on the top of the hour, so I'd like to thank you both for your insights and thank everyone for joining us in the webinar today. You always can follow up with us. You can send a note to us at OnePlan. I'm happy to connect you with Brett. We'll be sending the slides out with his QR code so you can look at the resources there. And I'm happy to schedule a demo of the OnePlan platform if that's something that you're interested in as well. So thanks everybody for your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks, Brett and Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.